Esteban walked unhurriedly through the central plaza of Puebla, bathed in the gentle warmth of the afternoon and the distant sound of children's laughter. He wasn't sure what exactly he was looking for there. Perhaps he just wanted to escape the monotony of his stressful routine. The company's social project had brought him to the city, but his heart felt restless, as if something, which he couldn't name, was about to happen. That's when he heard a sharp meow mixed with children's giggles, a sound so pure and carefree that his feet changed direction almost on impulse. In front of a small, colorful storefront filled with potted plants and animal toys, he read the handmade sign hanging on the door. Mi refugio, my refuge. Curious, he pushed open the wooden door, which swung with a gentle chime. Inside, the scene disarmed him. Two little girls were playing on the floor with a white kitten, with large eyes and soft fur. They smiled as if the world were made only of affection and lightheartedness, but what paralyzed him was something deeper. The girls' eyes were an intense blue, exactly like his. Those eyes didn't belong to chance. One of the girls turned, laughing, her brown hair coming loose from her headband with the movement. The other, quieter, petted the cat with a gentleness, as if she could feel it beyond touch. Esteban felt a hollow in his stomach. He didn't know if it was possible to recognize a part of himself in someone he had never seen. But there it was, a certainty etched into his chest. For a moment, the sound of the door chime, the smell of pet food in the air, the afternoon heat, everything disappeared. Only that suspended instant remained. His hand rested on a nearby counter, seeking balance. That's when a firm, yet calm voice cut through the silence. "Good afternoon. Can I help you?" He slowly turned his face. The woman behind the counter seemed frozen in time, her dark hair pulled back in a messy braid, her eyes more mature, but still the same. It was Valentina, the same woman he swore he had left in the past, but now she was there, in front of him, and beside her. Two little girls with eyes that would never again let him sleep in peace. Valentina's gaze was a foggy mirror. No tears, no pleading, just presence. A woman who had known abandonment, but had not surrendered to it. Esteban tried to say something, anything, but his throat went dry. The words wouldn't come, perhaps because no words could fit into that moment. The girls, oblivious to the silent hurricane between the adults, laughed and showed off the kitten as if it were a trophy. Esteban could barely look at them. The doubt no longer existed. They were his. They were part of what he once left behind, believing it was the right, or at least the most convenient thing to do. Now, everything screamed the opposite. Valentina stepped forward and took a small basket with pet toys. Her gesture was calm, almost rehearsed, but her eyes didn't lie. There was a firmness there that didn't ask for permission to exist. Esteban took a deep breath, trying not to tremble. Part of him wanted to run, as he always did. The other part knew it was already too late to run. There, in that small refuge for animals and broken hearts, life collected its price. And it collected it with beauty, with innocence, with the kind of love he had once disdained, but which now seemed to be the only thing that truly made sense. Esteban stood in the middle of the store, as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. His heart pounded fast, out of sync, and his throat felt too tight to let out any words. On the outside, he was the same elegant man, accustomed to important meetings and cold decisions. On the inside, he was just confusion and fear. The girls continued to play, oblivious to what that moment meant. Their laughter was light, without guilt, without a past. But for Esteban, every sound was a painful reminder of what he had lost. That laughter could have been a part of his life from the beginning, and he had thrown it all away, without even looking back. Valentina watched him with a firm, but not cold, gaze. She didn't seem surprised to see him there, as if she had already imagined this reunion many times in her mind, and was now simply living the scene. Her eyes said it all. Don't expect tears. Don't expect hugs. I've already cried too much because of you. He tried to smile, a fragile gesture that didn't even reach his eyes. He wanted to say something, but he realized that any word would sound too small in the face of what was in front of him. The girls, his daughters, that reality settled inside him with a weight that felt physical, a weight that he, one day, had refused to bear. The more talkative of the two, Isabella, though he still didn't know her name, proudly showed off the white kitten. "Look, Mommy, he likes me," she said with shining eyes. Valentina just nodded, with a brief and contained smile. Esteban looked at the scene like a stranger, looking through the window of a house that could have been his. "Do you want to adopt one of the kittens?" Valentina asked, her voice firm and neutral, as if he were just another customer. It was clear that she didn't want to make things easy for him. He needed to feel what she had felt. He needed to be pushed into the same abyss she had to climb out of alone. And deep down, he knew he deserved it. Esteban slowly approached the counter, but kept his distance. His gaze sought hers, but she only faced him for a few seconds before refocusing on the girls. It was as if she were saying, "My priority is over there, not you." And for the first time, Esteban understood what it was like not to be the center of anything. Part of him wanted to kneel down, to beg for forgiveness right there. The other, still proud, resisted. He had never had to beg for anything, but in that instant he realized that arrogance no longer fit. Life was in front of him in the form of two little girls who didn't know who he was, and maybe for now, it was better that way. Valentina walked away to attend to a lady who was entering the store, leaving him there with the weight of his own absence. He turned to the girls. The quieter one was drawing a cat with delicate strokes, focused, as if the world around her were just a backdrop. He noticed his hands were trembling. In that instant, a certainty swept through him. He wanted to be a part of their lives, not as someone who arrives and takes up space, but as someone who asks for permission. Only, to do that, he would need to face everything he had done, and even harder, everything he had failed to do. Esteban left the store slowly, like someone carrying a world on his shoulders. The sun still shone on Puebla, but inside him, it was all shadow. He walked aimlessly through the plaza, trying to make sense of what he had just seen. Images of the girls came back in flashes. Their hair, their eyes, the innocent way they played, and the cruel certainty grew. They were his daughters. How could he have disavowed all this? That was the question that burned inside him. Valentina never looked for him again. She never sent him a message. She never asked him for anything. He believed that by turning his back, he had closed that chapter. But now he understood that the story had only changed direction and had gone on without him. He sat on a wooden bench, the same one where so many anonymous people rested, without imagining that there, in that moment, a rich man accustomed to having control felt small. Everything he had conquered seemed distant, because there, in the face of that discovery, none of that mattered anymore. Those girls had grown up without him. They learned to take their first steps, to talk, to laugh, without hearing his voice. Someone taught them to brush their teeth, to get dressed, to say please and thank you. And it wasn't him. Esteban thought about how many birthdays he had missed, how many bedtime stories, how many unanswered questions. Did Valentina raise them with anger towards him in her heart? Or did she stay silent out of pride, perhaps for protection? He didn't know, but he felt that now the silence between them was a minefield. One false step, and everything could collapse. Still, he no longer had a choice. He needed to cross it. He tried to remember the last time he had thought about Valentina with real depth. It wasn't in five-star hotels or on trips. It was on silent nights, when everything was too quiet, and her face appeared without asking for permission. And now, along with that face, came two new ones, small, curious, alive. Esteban put his hand to his face, covering his eyes. It was pain, yes, but also regret. True regret, the kind that isn't solved with expensive flowers or rehearsed phrases. The kind of regret that makes a man review his own history and admit that he failed badly. He thought about going back, about knocking on the store's door and demanding answers, but the pride he still had stopped him. He didn't want to repeat the same mistake, to force a path where he needed to be invited, only time wouldn't wait. And he also knew that there were questions that needed to be asked and answered. He took a deep breath and looked at the blue sky of Puebla. Perhaps there was still time to do things differently, but before anything else, he needed to understand what Valentina had gone through and why she chose silence. Valentina closed the store door as the last customer left, leaving behind only the gentle smell of pet food and the muffled echo of children's footsteps. The girls continued to play in their corner, laughing with a gray kitten that insisted on climbing boxes. The atmosphere was calm, almost cozy. Almost, because between her and Esteban, the air seemed denser, as if every unsaid word occupied space. He had come back and was there, leaning against the counter like someone waiting for permission to stay. Valentina crossed her arms and faced him. The pain that once screamed inside her was now just silence. A silence he would have to learn to listen to. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. His voice lower than usual. Valentina nodded, but with the kind of calmness that isn't an invitation. It was more of a concession. After all, she knew this moment would come. She always knew that one day the past would knock on the door. She just didn't imagine she would see his face, so lost. "They are my daughters, aren't they?" he ventured. Valentina looked at him firmly, but didn't answer immediately. Deep down, she might have wanted to scream, "Yes," to dump every tear she had shed into his lap. But she had learned that not every answer needs to be said in the heat of emotion. Sometimes silence teaches more. "I didn't come to fight," he added. I just wanted to understand." Valentina walked to a shelf. She pretended to arrange a package of pet food. In truth, she also needed a second to breathe. Esteban was part of a life she had to bury to move on, and now that ghost was in front of her, with eyes full of guilt. The girls ran up with some discovery, an old toy perhaps, and showed it to their mother with enthusiasm. Valentina knelt down, listened to every little word with attention and affection. Esteban watched from a distance. Seeing her there, so dedicated, so present, hurt more than he expected. That woman was no longer the girl he had left. When the girls went back to playing, Valentina looked up. "You want to know everything I went through?" she finally asked. He nodded, but she didn't say anything. Not a word. She just walked to the door and took the handle. "Come back tomorrow if you really want to talk, but come prepared to listen." It was a gentle, but certain, blow. She wasn't kicking him out, but she wasn't welcoming him either. It was an invitation, yes, but with conditions, and that made it clear who was in control now. Esteban left the store with a heart heavier than when he entered. Her silence accompanied him, like a reminder of everything he still didn't know. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the girls' faces or heard Valentina's serene tone. There were no shouts or accusations, just truths stored in a deep place, and he felt deep down that he needed to get there, even if it hurt. Because sometimes, silence says what we don't dare to. Before everything fell apart, there was a girl with curious eyes and a heart full of plans. Valentina lived with her grandmother in a simple neighborhood in Puebla, where the streets still smelled of fresh bread in the morning and the windows held stories of ordinary people. It was a quiet routine, without great luxuries, but full of small loves. Since she was little, she had a fascination with animals. She rescued kittens from the street, healed wounded birds, and talked to dogs as if they understood every word. Her grandmother used to say that she had a gift for listening with her heart, and Valentina believed that, not because she wanted to be special, but because she felt useful that way. Her big dream was to open a place where she could take care of animals and, at the same time, find a little bit of freedom. She didn't want to depend on anyone. She wanted a space all her own, with the smell of pet food, colorful walls, and many shelves full of stories. A refuge for animals, but also for herself. But dreaming didn't pay the bills. She worked in a small veterinary clinic and, in her free time, sold handmade pet toys. She sewed plush toys at night, with the sound of the radio low in the background and the watchful eye of her grandmother nearby. It was a tight life, but Valentina didn't complain. She knew where she wanted to go. Sometimes, she imagined what the inauguration of her store would be like. She visualized the name painted by hand on the sign, the first visits, the smiles of the customers. That was what made her get out of bed every day. And, despite the difficulties, she didn't think about giving up. Every saved penny was an invisible brick of the future she was silently building. Valentina didn't have many friends, but she was loved by everyone. She had a discreet kindness, the kind that doesn't boast, but stays in your memory. When she smiled, it seemed that even animals trusted her more. And to a young person, she had a maturity in her eyes that came from care, from listening, from the daily struggle. Her grandmother was her foundation, a woman of few words, but of deep gestures. It was she who held Valentina up when fatigue threatened to bring her down. And it was also she who said, with simple conviction, that true love begins with what one cares for, not with what one expects to receive. It was in this setting, among pet food cans, colorful threads, and warm Puebla afternoons, that Valentina dreamed without haste. She didn't expect someone to come and rescue her. On the contrary, she wanted to build her own path, even if it was slow, even if it demanded more than she had. She still didn't know, but fate would bring a twist. One of those that change everything and test the strength of dreams. Because sometimes, before blooming, life throws everything to the ground. And that's where you discover how much you really believe in what you dream. The meeting between Valentina and Esteban was not like in the movies. There was no background music or slow-motion glances. It happened on an ordinary day, while she was selling pet toys at a community fair. Esteban was passing by chance, accompanying a business friend, visibly out of place in the midst of the simplicity of that place. He wore an impeccable white shirt, an expensive watch, and a distracted look that didn't seem to notice much around him until he saw Valentina. She, with her hair pulled back in a casual way, her face sweaty from the sun, and her hands busy with a puppy in her arms, laughed at something a little girl said. It was in that laugh that he stopped. Esteban approached out of curiosity, perhaps out of boredom, perhaps on impulse. He didn't expect to find Grace there, but something about that simple girl attracted him like a magnet. She greeted him without ceremony, without noticing who he was or the weight of the Montiel last name. And it was precisely that disarmed him. She treated him as if he were just one more person. Valentina didn't know that this man was the owner of a chain of luxury hotels. She just noticed that he was looking at her too much. "Do you like animals?" she asked, as she offered him a small keychain in the shape of a dog. Esteban said yes, but he stammered a little, which made him seem, for a second, just an ordinary man. The conversation went on longer than he planned. She talked with passion about rescues, about her dream of having a store, about how every little animal deserved a home. He, accustomed to conversations about stocks, events, and investments, found himself listening with rare attention. And, without realizing it, he felt more present than at many important dinners. In the following days, he came back. First with silly excuses. He wanted to buy another toy or donate pet food. Then, just because he wanted to see her again. Valentina found this sudden interest strange, but she didn't close herself off. She liked the lightness of their conversations, the contrast between her simple life and the mystery he carried in his eyes. Esteban had never met anyone like Valentina. She didn't try to impress him. She didn't seem to want anything from him, and perhaps that's why he wanted to be near. Her presence made him remember something he didn't even know he had lost. Peace. And that was new, disconcerting. But Valentina, for her part, felt confused. Esteban was polite, even too kind, but he came from a world she didn't know. At the same time, he listened in a different way, unhurried, like someone who truly wants to understand. That moved her. There was something in him that seemed real, even when everything around him screamed the opposite. The meetings became more frequent. A coffee here, a walk there. They laughed, they argued, they exchanged confidences. And over time, the improbable began to take shape. Two people from opposite universes were beginning to meet halfway, and in that middle ground, something was beginning to be born. They still didn't know it, but that innocent encounter would plant the roots of an intense story, made of charms, difficult decisions, and deep scars. Because sometimes, love doesn't arrive with warnings. It just settles in, and it begins to change everything. The romance between Valentina and Esteban blossomed little by little, like someone learning to breathe again. He, accustomed to the immediacy of empty relationships, found a calmer rhythm in her. With Valentina, there were no games or masks, just truth. And that truth, although simple, moved everything he knew. She, for her part, allowed herself to dream. Despite having her feet on the ground, she felt her heart beat differently when he arrived. The conversations became deeper, the touches more frequent, the glances lingered longer than they should. And when she realized it, she was already involved to her soul. It was a love that, although improbable, seemed possible. On weekends, he would show up with flowers from the market and the most awkward smile in the world. He would help wash dishes in her grandmother's yard, trying to pretend he knew how to deal with puppies. Valentina would laugh. He would too. And between a joke and a stolen kiss, they built memories that seemed eternal. They seemed to be. One day, Valentina began to feel something different in her body. A dizziness here, a nausea there. She thought it was the heat or fatigue, but the pharmacy test didn't lie. 2 lines. Pregnant. She looked at herself in the mirror with trembling hands. She was scared, of course, but she also had hope. She thought, maybe now we'll be a family. That morning, Valentina woke up with a slight hope in her chest. She had prepared a simple coffee, carefully set the table, and put the pregnancy test in the envelope. She wanted to show Esteban that a little heart was already beating inside her. She wanted him to see that there was life there, that there was a beginning. He arrived late. like someone who no longer wants to be there. He was well dressed, too perfumed. Valentina felt that something was wrong, even before she heard any words. But still, she opened the envelope with a shy smile. She put the test in front of him, hoping, with all her heart, that that moment would unite them. Esteban looked, but he didn't react. He didn't smile. He didn't ask anything. He just pushed the test back with 2 fingers, like someone pushing away something unwanted. Valentina fell silent. The time between them grew longer, until he said, direct, blunt, without care, "I'm not going to carry a burden that I didn't choose." Those words didn't come alone. They came with the rest of the sentence. "That's your problem. I'm already with someone else, and I think it's better if we end this once and for all." Valentina felt her legs tremble, but she remained seated. She looked at him as one looks at a stranger. That wasn't the same person who washed dishes in the yard. She wanted to say so many things. She wanted to ask why. She wanted to say that that baby was a part of both of them. But nothing came out. It was as if her throat was blocked by pain. And he, there in front of, seemed to be made of stone. He didn't even apologize. He just stood up, adjusted the watch on his wrist, and said, "Take care." Valentina didn't cry in front of him. She swallowed everything, like someone who learns to swallow their own heart. She got up slowly, took the ultrasound back, and put it in the envelope with steady hands. Then she opened the door and said in a low voice, "You can go," and he left, without looking back. When the door closed, her world collapsed. Not with screams, but in silence. That dense silence that weighs on your shoulders and crushes your chest. Valentina sat on the floor, and she stayed there for hours, not knowing what to do. She had lost someone, and at the same time, she had gained a reason to continue. In the days that followed, she decided that she would not ask for anything. No help, no explanation, no presence. She was hurt, yes, but not broken. With time, she would understand that that wasn't the end. It was the exact point where she stopped depending on empty promises. And so, alone, with a heart in pieces and a child in her womb, Valentina took the first of many steps. A step that Esteban didn't even imagine she was capable of taking. The news of the pregnancy left Valentina surrounded by silence. A new silence, different from the one Esteban left behind. It was the silence of long nights, of the dark room, of doubts that had no one to be shared with. Her grandmother, always firm, held her hand tightly, but didn't ask questions. She just stayed by her side, like a lighthouse on a cloudy night. The first few months were difficult. Her body was changing, her emotions too. Sometimes, Valentina would cry for no apparent reason. Other times, she would smile, just imagining the baby's little face. Even with fear, she felt a certainty growing along with her belly. No matter what happened, she could handle everything. She spent her mornings at the veterinary clinic trying to distract herself. In the afternoon, she sewed plush toys and prepared donation boxes for rescued animals. The nausea came, her feet swelled, but she kept going. She kept going because now it wasn't just about her. It was about 2 lives that were beating inside her womb. 2 little hearts that depended on hers. Yes, 2. When she had the ultrasound and heard that they would be twins, Valentina cried. But for the first time in a long time, she cried with joy. She laughed, even with teary eyes, and said softly, "You came in a pair to remind me that I'll never be alone again." From then on, something inside her changed. She began to talk to her daughters. She called them "my girls," and made them sweet promises while caressing her belly. She told them stories, dreamed of names, imagined the sound of their voices. They were silent conversations that only she heard, and yet they were what kept her on her feet. Over time, her belly grew, and along with it, the strength that Valentina didn't even know she had. She had difficult nights, yes, of nostalgia, of fatigue, of pain, but in none of them did she think about giving up. Esteban was a distant memory now. The present was all in her hands. Her grandmother helped where she could, preparing teas, cooking light meals, arranging pillows in bed. But it was Valentina who faced the real weight, the fear of failing, the responsibility of raising two girls alone, the uncertainty about the future. Still, she didn't hesitate. She couldn't hesitate. In her few free hours, she would scribble ideas for her dream pet store. She made simple drawings, jotted down names, sketched display windows, all with an old pencil in a worn notebook. It was her way of saying, "I'm still here, I still believe," because believing was her form of resistance. Valentina knew that life doesn't always give you what you expect, but she also knew that, even hurt, she was still capable of loving. And it was in that new love, for what had not yet been born, that she reinvented herself. The twins hadn't arrived yet, but they were already her reason, her company, and her hope. And while the world outside continued at its own pace, Valentina, with her hands on her belly and her heart open, prepared for the most challenging and most beautiful role of her life, being a mother. After the twins' birth, Valentina didn't have time to stop. There was no room for lament. Sleepless nights, bottles, crying, and the first fevers arrived like a gentle storm, exhausting, yes, but also full of meaning. She discovered she was stronger than she had imagined, and in the midst of so much giving, an old, dormant desire began to take shape, but it was still alive. To open her own space, the place she had always dreamed of, a simple pet store where she could take care of animals and, at the same time, create an atmosphere of peace, something that was more than a store, a corner of welcome, for animals and for people. With her grandmother's help, she gathered the little she had. They sold old furniture, used the money from her hard-earned savings, and found a small place in the central plaza. It was modest, with faded walls and crooked windows, but Valentina saw an opportunity there, a new beginning, a possible home. For weeks, she painted the walls with her own hands, hung plants in boxes, and put colorful stickers on the display windows. The twins were in a corner, in their improvised cribs, while her grandmother prepared coffee for those who helped with the arrangements. The store took shape little by little, with affection in every detail. On opening day, Valentina hung a handmade sign on the door. Mi Refugio was more than a name. It was what that place meant, a refuge from pain, from loneliness, from loss, a point of light built with what was left of her, and also with what was reborn. The first sale was symbolic. A lady bought a blue leash for the puppy she had just adopted, and left smiling, saying she had never felt so good in a pet store. That moved Valentina in a profound way, because that was what she wanted, not just to sell products, but to touch lives. Over time, the space became a meeting point. Children would pass by to play with the cats. Old people would come for tea and conversation. Teenagers would leave notes of encouragement on the walls, and abandoned animals would find not only refuge, but also affection. Every corner of the store held a story of overcoming. The twins grew up among bags of pet food, plush toys, and puppy barks. Isabella learned to say meow even before she said mommy. Luna drew paws in notebooks. The store was part of their childhood, but it was also a piece of Valentina's heart, a place where everything started over. She still felt nostalgia, Sometimes she still thought about Esteban on silent nights, but not with pain, with distance. Time had created space between what was and what is, and Mi Refugio was proof that even when everything seems lost, it's possible to rebuild, with courage, with love, and with the help of those who never let go of your hand. While Valentina was building a new world with her own hands, Esteban continued in the opposite direction. In the golden halls of hotels, he was the same smiling man, surrounded by applause and champagne glasses. The rich spoke his name with respect. Women sought him out like a trophy, but inside him, something had broken, and no one saw it. Dinners were always the same: expensive dishes, dim lights, forced laughter. He listened to conversations about investments and exotic destinations, but his mind wandered. Sometimes Valentina's face would appear in the middle of a toast, like a gentle ghost. He would try to push those memories away, but they would come back, stronger with every silence. Esteban tried to fill the void with things. He bought a new car, an apartment in another country, watches he never wore. He changed companions like he changed clothes, always with smiles at the beginning and silence at the end. No woman stayed, no story lasted, no kiss could drown out the emptiness. In some early mornings, alone in his penthouse, he would open a random bottle and look out the window. Down below, the city was beating, but inside him, it was all shadow. No one knew. To the world, Esteban was successful, admired, envied, but he himself could no longer admire himself, and that hurt more than any rejection. There was something he never told anyone. Sometimes he dreamed of a little girl. He never saw her face, but he heard her laugh, a light laugh, similar to one he had heard years ago in an improvised pet store, with the smell of fresh paint and brown eyes shining among kittens. He always woke up from those dreams with a tightness in his chest. One day, he found an old photo of Valentina on his phone. She was holding a puppy, smiling with her face pressed against the animal's fur. It was a simple but true image. Esteban stared at it for a long time. He thought about calling, but he didn't know what to say. Time had passed, and with it, the right to be heard. He tried to move on, as he always did, but now, the weight was greater. Regret began to come in waves. It wasn't just for the woman he lost, but for everything he hadn't lived, for the child he had rejected, for the cowardice he didn't know how to face. He was beginning to understand that money doesn't buy peace, and that success doesn't cover emotional voids. In meetings, his presence was mechanical. At parties, his smile was empty. Friends praised him, but they didn't really know him. He no longer knew who he was, and in the midst of so much luxury, he began to long for something he didn't know how to name. A return, perhaps, an apology, or just a moment of truth. Esteban was a man with everything and completely empty inside. And deep down, he knew that part of that loneliness was chosen by himself. Now, he just had to deal with the consequences. Or, who knows, try to do things differently, if it was still possible. 4 years had passed since that goodbye without a return. Enough time to change a face, mature a voice, transform an entire life. Esteban didn't plan to go back to Puebla. It was a formal invitation, one of those his company received all the time, a social project linked to education and animal welfare. He accepted on impulse, perhaps out of curiosity, or because of unresolved nostalgia. He arrived in the city with the same elegant posture as always, but his gaze seemed wearier. He walked through the streets with a strange sense of familiarity. Every corner seemed to hide an echo of the past, The smells, the sounds, the colorful walls, everything brought back the memory of Valentina, although he didn't say it out loud. During a walk to the central plaza, Esteban heard a sound different from the hustle and bustle of the city. Children's giggles, soft meows, the sound of boxes being dragged. He followed that sound, curious, and then, as if in a movie that no one had announced was about to begin, he saw the facade of a small, charming store. Mi Refugio. The name hit him in the chest. He instantly remembered her dream, the project she described over coffee, with a sparkle in her eyes. Esteban approached slowly, like someone stepping on sacred ground. He pushed the door carefully. A bell rang, and then his whole life stopped for an instant. Two little girls were playing with a white cat, their hair curly, their eyes honey-colored, their smiles spontaneous. They were his. Even without ever having seen them before, he knew it. His heart beat so fast, it felt like his body wouldn't be able to handle it. There on the store floor, two small versions of himself played without knowing who he was. He stood still, trying to catch his breath. The girls laughed heartily, showing the kitten where the little bed was. It was a light, ordinary moment, but for Esteban, it was the most important moment of his life. He had never felt so close, and at the same time so distant from something he wanted so much. And then she appeared, Valentina, with an apron stained with paint, her hair in a messy bun, and a serene presence. Time had touched her gently, more mature, more firm, but with the same light in her eyes. When she saw him, she didn't get scared. She just stopped for a second. Then she continued walking, as if she had already known he would come. Esteban tried to speak, but his voice wouldn't come out. Valentina looked at him calmly. There was no anger or surprise, just a type of silence that speaks for itself. The girls ran to her, hugged her waist, and began to tell her the kitten's name. She listened to everything attentively, without taking her eyes off him. It was there, among pet toys, children's laughter, and the smell of hope in the air, that the past and the present faced each other. Esteban didn't know what to do, but one thing was for sure. He couldn't just leave, because for the first time in years, he felt that he was exactly where he should be. In the days following the reunion, Esteban began to show up frequently at Mi Refugio, always with an excuse, a donation of pet food, a new toy for the cats, a box of milk for the puppies. But Valentina saw beyond that. She knew he wasn't there for the animals. He was there for the girls, and maybe for her. Valentina received him with politeness. She was never rude. She never closed the door on him. But there was a clear distance in every gesture. He would talk. She would listen. He would smile. She would respond with neutrality. It was as if an invisible wall separated them, and that wall was made of everything he hadn't lived by her side. Esteban tried to approach the girls carefully, watching from a distance, asking subtle questions. Isabella was more open. She would start conversations, ask for his help to feed a puppy, and laugh at the stories he told with a certain exaggeration. Luna was slower. She would stay away, spying, but she no longer looked away when he passed. Esteban learned to recognize the small signs, a side smile, a shy greeting, a drawing left on the counter. Each gesture was a step. He didn't know much about being a father, but he began to understand that being a father wasn't about knowing everything. It was about being there, day after day, even without guarantees. Some days were easier. On others, he felt like he was back at square one. But he didn't give up. He knew he had lost precious years, and now he wanted to do things differently. Not to compensate, because certain things can't be compensated for, but to build something new, real, with time, with care. Valentina began to perceive that he was no longer the hurried and timid man she had known. Esteban no longer talked about trips, numbers, or business. Now he talked about the habits of a grumpy cat, or about how Luna hid to draw in peace. He was paying attention, and that made all the difference. One day, without him expecting it, Isabella called him Uncle Esteban. The word sounded sweet, familiar, and it hurt a little too. It wasn't Dad, but it was a start. He smiled, knelt down, and thanked her as if he had received the greatest gift in the world, because for him, in that moment, it was. Over time, he began to get to know the girls for real. He discovered that Isabella was full of energy, talked a lot, and wanted to be a veterinarian. Luna, on the other hand, liked silence. She scribbled the world with colored pencils, and sometimes said more with a look than with entire sentences. Each one had a particular universe, and he wanted to be a part of them. Esteban began to write small stories about the animals in the store, inventing adventures with characters that resembled the twins. Valentina found one of those texts on a wrinkled piece of paper near the cash register. She read it in silence, and for the first time, she felt her heart truly soften. Not out of nostalgia, but out of recognition, because there was a man who once fled and was now learning to stay. Not in a hurry, not with speeches, but with consistency. And perhaps, in the end, that was what mattered most. Esteban's request hung in the air like a half-open door. Valentina didn't answer immediately. She looked at him for long seconds, as if trying to find some truth in that face of a past and broken promises. And yes, there was something different in his eyes. It wasn't charm. It wasn't nostalgia. It was shame. "I was wrong," he said, for the first time with a low voice, without pretense. "I was a coward. I ran away when I should have stayed. And now I know I lost more than you did. I lost a life that could have been mine too." The words came out with difficulty, like someone who is afraid of seeming too fragile, but knows they can no longer pretend. Valentina crossed her arms. She felt a knot in her chest. She wanted to say it was too late, that she no longer needed apologies, but it would be a lie. She had waited for those words, even without admitting it. Only now, hearing them didn't bring her relief. It brought her doubt, because regret alone doesn't sustain any bridge. "You want to meet the girls?" she asked directly. Esteban nodded. "I want to be part of their lives, but only if it's to add something. I don't want to get in the way of what you've built." That, in a way, moved Valentina, not because of the content, but because of the tone, because of the humility she had never seen in him. But Valentina knew the weight of promises, and even more, she knew what it was like to raise 2 daughters without expecting anything from anyone. "I won't stop them from getting to know you," she said, "but they're the ones who will decide if it's worth it. I'm not going to force anything, and you're not going to introduce yourself as their father overnight." Esteban understood the message. It wouldn't be easy. There would be no reserved place waiting for him. He would have to conquer everything, from Valentina's trust to his daughter's affection, with calmness, without haste, without pressure. And perhaps that was fair, because no apology erases a 4-year absence. He left that conversation with a heavy heart, but for the first time he felt there was a path, a narrow one, full of stones, but possible. And the possibility, after so long in the dark, was a small, but real, light. Valentina, as she closed the store that night, took a deep breath. She felt exhausted, but curiously light. Not because she trusted him again, but because she felt that now she was in control of the story. Esteban wouldn't return as the man who left her. If he wanted to stay, he would have to prove, day after day, that he had changed. And so, with timid steps and finally truthful words, what seemed like a finished story gained a continuation. Not a hurried reconciliation, but perhaps a reconstruction. A cautious new beginning, where every gesture would count more than any regret. Esteban returned to Mi Refugio the next day, and the next one, too. Always in a light way, without haste, without grand gestures. He didn't come with promises, nor did he try to force smiles. He just showed up, and he stayed. He helped sweep the floor, clean the dishes, change the cat's water. Simple things, but things that carried intention. At first, Valentina watched him from a distance. She wanted to see how far he would go. Not with words, but with actions. Esteban didn't complain. He arrived early. He left when the tasks were done. He carried heavy boxes, packed products, looked for pet food. Everything in silence, like someone trying to learn a new language. The language of presence. The twins, little by little, began to notice him. Isabella, curious, approached more easily. She asked questions. She asked for his help to feed a puppy. She laughed at the stories he told with a certain exaggeration. Luna was slower. She stayed far away, spying, but she no longer looked away when he passed. Esteban learned to recognize the small signs, a side smile, a shy greeting, a drawing left on the counter. Each gesture was a step. He didn't know much about being a father, but he began to understand that being a father wasn't about knowing everything. It was about being there, day after day, even without guarantees. Some days were easier. On others, he felt he was back at square one. But he didn't give up. He knew he had lost precious years. And now he wanted to do things differently. Not to compensate, because certain things can't be compensated for, but to build something new, real, with time, with care. Valentina began to realize that he was no longer the hurried and vain man she had known. Esteban no longer talked about trips, numbers, or business. Now he talked about the habits of a grumpy cat, or about how Luna hid to draw in peace. He was paying attention, and that made all the difference. One day, without him expecting it, Isabella called him Uncle Esteban. The word sounded sweet, familiar, and it hurt a little too. It wasn't Dad, but it was a start. He smiled, knelt down, and thanked her as if he had received the greatest gift in the world. Because, for him, in that moment, it was. Over time, he began to get to know the girls for real. He discovered that Isabella was full of energy. She talked a lot. She wanted to be a veterinarian. Luna, on the other hand, liked silence. She scribbled the world with colored pencils, and sometimes she said more with a look than with entire sentences. Each one had a particular universe, and he wanted to be a part of them. Esteban began to write small stories about the animals in the store, inventing adventures with characters that resembled the twins. Valentina found one of those texts on a wrinkled piece of paper near the cash register. She read it in silence, and for the first time, she felt her heart truly soften. Not out of nostalgia, but out of recognition. Because there was a man who once fled and was now learning to stay. Not in a hurry, not with speeches, but with consistency. And perhaps, in the end, that was what mattered most. Esteban's transformation didn't happen all at once. It came little by little, in the small details of everyday life. One day, he held a newborn puppy in his hands and felt his heart tighten in a strange way. It was too small, too fragile, too innocent. He had never noticed it. He always believed that sensitivity was weakness, but in that instant, it was strength. On another afternoon, Isabella told an invented story about an astronaut cat who lived on the moon and sent letters to a dog on Earth. Esteban listened to everything attentively, laughing at the absurd parts and praising the poorly done drawings. He never imagined that listening to a child could be so powerful. It was as if she saw him with clean, non-judgmental eyes. Luna took longer, but one day she left a drawing on the counter. It was a man sitting on the floor, surrounded by kittens and two little girls. It was him. Esteban held that paper as if it were glass. He didn't say anything. He just put it in his pocket and took it home. He stared at that drawing for hours, like someone who guards something sacred. Valentina observed everything with a mixture of surprise and protection. She didn't give in to the easy charm, but she recognized the signs. Esteban was no longer a visitor. He was part of the routine. He cleaned cages, swept the sidewalk, organized the shelves, and did everything with care, not as an obligation, but as someone who truly wants to be part of something bigger. He started to like the smell of the store, the random conversations with customers, the rough feel of the pet food bags. He felt that there he was, finding something that money had never given him: belonging. And in simple gestures, like bathing a scared dog or feeding a sick cat, he recognized himself in a new way. Little by little, Valentina allowed small invitations. A lunch at home with the girls, a walk in the plaza on Sundays, a family board game, all with clear limits. But still, spaces that once seemed impossible. And in those moments, Esteban didn't try to impress. He was just there, present, whole. One rainy morning, the twins got sick. Fever, cough, sleepless nights. Esteban showed up with soup, blankets, and medicine. He waited outside for Valentina to accept. And she accepted. For the first time, he helped take care of them. Not just to play, but to take care of them. And that changed him more than any previous gesture. Over time, he learned to listen, not just to the words, but to the silences. He knew when Luna needed space. He knew when Isabella needed to talk too much to hide some insecurity. And he also knew when Valentina was tired, even without her saying so. It was as if he were tuning his senses to that family that he was beginning to recognize as his own. The little miracles were in everything. In an unexpected hug, in a whispered thank you, in a coffee shared in silence. Things that would have gone unnoticed before, but now they had the weight of revelations. Esteban understood more and more that loving is not talking. It's staying. It's caring even when no one sees. And in that daily life full of meows, laughter, and small hands, he finally discovered what it was to be a father. Not by title, but by presence, by dedication, by the transformation that happens when you stop thinking about yourself and start to love for real. It was a common afternoon, one of those when the sun entered lazily through the store windows and the smell of pet food mixed with the sound of meows. The twins were playing with empty boxes, laughing heartily at some invention of the moment. Esteban was nearby, arranging shelves, when he felt something different in his chest, and discomfort that wasn't pain. It was urgency. He looked at Valentina, who was folding cloths over the counter, and then he looked back at the girls. He felt that there was a conversation he could no longer postpone. You couldn't continue building bonds without first facing your own absence. And in that moment, Esteban decided it was time to say what had never been said. With all the letters, with all the failures. "Girls," he called them in a low but firm voice. The two of them turned at the same time. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" They approached with the lightness of those who don't carry a past, Esteban knelt on the floor, getting to the level of their eyes. Valentina stopped what she was doing and watched in silence. He took a deep breath. He felt his heart racing. The words came slowly, as if they needed to get through years of silence. "I want to tell you something and apologize. Truly." The girls exchanged a quick, curious look. Luna held the hem of her dress. Isabella frowned. They waited. He continued. "When you were in your mom's belly, I didn't stay. I left. And that was wrong. Very wrong. I was scared. I was selfish. And I left your mom alone at a time when she needed me most. And you? You grew up without knowing who I was, because I didn't know how to be a better person." Valentina pressed her lips together. She was standing, motionless, but her heart was beating as if she were also on her knees there. Esteban continued, his eyes welling up. "I can't go back in time. I can't change what I did. But I can say that I regret it, truly, and that I want to be here now, if you let me." Isabella was the first to speak. Her voice came out low, almost whispered. "Were you afraid of us?" Esteban swallowed. "Yes, I was. But not because you didn't deserve it. It was because I didn't know how to be a better person, and running away seemed easier." Luna, who until then had remained silent, rested her head on her sister's shoulder. There were no immediate hugs, no ready-made phrases of forgiveness. But there, on that floor, in front of two little girls and a woman who had held everything together alone, Esteban stripped himself of all armor. For the first time, he showed his fragility without shame. It was just him asking for forgiveness, naked of vanity, full of truth. Valentina approached slowly, knelt beside him, looked him in the eyes, and said in a firm voice, "They don't know everything you caused, but I do, and I still let you in again, not out of weakness, but because they deserve the opportunity to know a father who is trying to do things right." And in that instant, without grand gestures, something new was born. A forgiveness still without a name, a commitment under construction, and above all, the certainty that love, when it is sincere, begins precisely when you have the courage to show where it hurts. The days passed peacefully in Puebla, but Valentina felt a strange weight approaching. Rumors began to circulate. A new company wanted to buy the land around the plaza, including the building where Mi Refugio was located. The proposal was generous, but it meant only one thing: the end of the store and everything it represented. Valentina received the news with a firm face, but a heavy heart. The store wasn't just a business. It was history. It was roots. It was the home where she raised her daughters and rebuilt herself from the ruins. Thinking about dismantling those shelves, about taking the kittens out of there, was like putting out a living part of herself. But fighting against influential businessmen seemed impossible. When Esteban found out, he didn't react with empty words. He didn't say, "Everything will be all right." He didn't promise worlds. He just listened, with attention, with respect. That night, he didn't sleep. He paced back and forth in his apartment, reviewing papers, making calls. He knew who was behind the project, and more than that, he knew he had influence there. The next morning, he went straight to a meeting with old partners, people he hadn't talked to in a long time, businessmen who only understood one language: profit. Esteban put something on the table that no one expected: his own part in a multi-million-dollar contract, in exchange for a single condition: that the Mi Refugio location be excluded from the project. The board members laughed at first. They thought he was bluffing, but they soon realized he was serious. He would give up prestige, share, and influence. "And why?" he said. "Because for the first time, I understand what it is to have something that cannot be replaced by money." It was the most difficult meeting of his life, and also the most truthful. Valentina only found out days later. He didn't tell her. It was the building owner who showed up at the store with a new contract and a smile on his face. "Your place is guaranteed, Mrs. Valentina. Someone very determined made this happen." She was puzzled. She asked who. But the man just replied, "Someone who learned to value roots." She looked for Esteban that same afternoon. She found him sitting in the plaza, watching the girls play with a new puppy. When she asked him what he had done, he replied with simplicity, "I just did what I should have done from the beginning. Take care of what matters." She didn't say anything, but her look was more profound than any answer. That night, Valentina closed the store slowly. She ran her hands over the shelves, petted the kittens, looked at the drawing with the girls' drawings, and cried. For the first time, not out of pain, but out of relief. She felt that, for the first time, someone had stayed. Not just for her, but for everything she had built with so much love. Esteban didn't save the store out of heroism. He did it because he understood, at last, that caring is not showing up with flowers. It's showing up when there's fire. It's putting yourself in the other person's place and truly offering what you have, even if it costs a lot, even if no one sees it, because loving is acting. And in that silent gesture, he showed that he had changed. Time has a strange way of healing. It doesn't erase the pains, but it changes their color. What once burned now only hurts slightly. And one day, the pain turns into memory. That's how it was with Valentina. She didn't forget what she went through. She didn't erase the absence or pretend she hadn't suffered. But little by little, the weight transformed into space. Space to think, to feel, to perhaps forgive. She watched Esteban often, not out of distrust, but out of habit. Every gesture of his was a new chapter. He now knew how to fold the towels at the store, separate pet food by type, and understood that Luna liked silence before bed. It wasn't perfection. It was effort. It was presence. And that, more than any word, moved her. One Sunday, the twins were lying on the store floor, playing with the kittens, when Isabella suddenly asked, "Mommy, can Esteban have dinner with us tonight?" Valentina hesitated. She looked at him. He didn't say anything. He just waited. And in that small gesture of waiting, she felt something different, an old weariness leaving her. That night, they had dinner together for the first time in a long time. The table was simple, with rice, beans, vegetables, and juice. The girls chattered away, laughed, told stories from school. Esteban listened with the calm look of someone who doesn't want to dominate the conversation, just be a part of it. And Valentina, for the first time, didn't feel like running away. After they fell asleep, he offered to wash the dishes. She didn't stop him. The two of them stood side by side, in silence, with the sound of the water and the dishes clinking softly, until she said, "You really have changed." It was a simple phrase, but full of weight. He stopped for a second, looked her in the eyes, and replied, "You taught me to change. I just didn't know you were teaching me." Valentina took a deep breath. She knew there were no guarantees. Loving someone who has already hurt you requires a different kind of courage, a mature courage that knows that trust is not blind surrender. It's a daily choice. And in that moment, she understood that moving on wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about deciding that it would no longer rule her present. In the days that followed, she allowed small approaches. A walk to the market together, an afternoon reading with the girls, a note left on the door with a "Good morning" drawn by Esteban. Simple things, but things that spoke louder than any grandiose declaration. Because love, after being broken, is not rebuilt in a hurry. She knew there was a risk. There always is. But there was also a sincere desire to try, not out of nostalgia, but because she saw with her own eyes the transformation happen. Esteban was now a man who didn't run away, and that, for her, was bigger than any gesture from the past. Valentina still carried scars, yes, but now she looked at them without pain, as marks of a difficult story, but one that had been overcome. And there, among pet toys, washed dishes, and hands that no longer let go so easily, she realized that love was not perfect, but it was possible, even after everything. And in that silent yes she gave, inside her heart there was no illusion. There was a choice, the choice to continue, to start over, and who knows, to love again, in a new way, stronger and more true. That afternoon the sun seemed kinder. The light entered through the windows of Mi Refugio with a serene calmness, warming the old tiled floor and the corners where the kittens slept peacefully. The twins ran around the store with their hair loose, carrying baskets of toys. Valentina watched from a distance, smiling in silence, and beside her was Esteban, not as a visitor, but as part of the scene. He was holding a small box of milk and laughing at something Isabella had said. Luna, as always, walked slower, but now she held his hand naturally. There was no longer fear in her eyes, just trust. Esteban, who once feared not fitting in anywhere, now felt that he belonged, not out of obligation, but out of merit. Valentina swept the floor with light movements. Sometimes she was surprised to think about everything they had been through and everything they had endured, and now, looking around, she saw the result. A store full of life, of a good aroma, of voices she loved. From time to time her eyes would fill with tears, but they were good tears, the kind that wash, not the kind that drown. Mi Refugio was no longer just a pet store. It was a space where stories crossed paths, where wounds healed in silence, and where love was not talked about. It was lived. An abandoned dog found a new home. A sick cat was cared for with affection. And in the midst of all this, a once broken family rebuilt itself. A new customer came in and commented, "There's a different atmosphere here. It seems like everything here has a soul." Valentina thanked him with a shy smile, while Esteban put more bags of food on the shelf. The girls sat down to draw, and without a word they began to scribble the same scene. The store, the cats, Mommy, Daddy, all together. In that moment, Esteban knelt beside them and looked at the drawing. His eyes shone. He didn't need anything else. That was what he had always looked for and never found at parties, on trips, or in business. There, in the innocent stroke of two little girls, he understood that true love lives where you decide to stay. Valentina saw him there, kneeling, surrounded by her daughters, and felt something deep in her chest. It wasn't euphoria. It was peace. A peace that only comes when you accept the past, but choose to live in the present. She approached, took his hand, and said softly, "Thank you for not leaving again." He squeezed it lightly and replied, "Now I know that this is where I want to be." When it was time to close the store, everyone helped. It was almost a ritual. The kittens were put in their corners, the lights were carefully turned off, and the door chime rang like a happy farewell. Outside, the plaza was still vibrating with the sounds of the sunset, but inside, the heart of the story beat stronger than ever. Before they left, the twins ran to their parents and hugged them at the same time, a hug without warning, full of strength, laughter, and life. Valentina closed her eyes for an instant, like someone etching that moment into her chest, And in that instant, she knew. Now, yes, they had a family. Not perfect, but complete. And so, Mi Refugio came to house not only animals looking for a home, but also hearts that were once broken, and that, with time, patience, and love found their way back home. I invite you to leave your opinion about this incredible story in the comments. If you liked it, share it, and subscribe to the channel to support our work. Another story is appearing on your screen that will probably also move you. Don't miss it.